to understand all that. There's a large process that needs to be gone through in order to do site development stuff. And to go through all that is going down a large rabbit hole. I think it's really important that we start looking at the actual document itself and looking at what we need to amend in the current IGA. I don't think affordable housing is something that we need to even look at. Affordable housing is a goal, common goal between the two communities. It's something that we both have desire for. The AMI is something that is a government, it's a government, what's the word? Measurement of how affordable housing is, how they measure it. So to look at that is not, it's not necessary. It's irrelevant for this conversation. And there's not anything that we need to, we just don't, I feel like we don't need to look at it.
That was a motion. I think it was a very long motion, but
yeah.
I believe that was a motion.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know much about Robert's rules. Can I speak
Well,
to that or not?
I think technically we should have had a second before we had a dissertation on it, but
sure.
We had a second. If anybody wants to remove that from discussion, we can certainly do that. If nobody's sure and they want to
I'm
open it
not
up to
sure. I'm tending to agree that it's beyond our scope.
Can I ask one question? How many people, by show of hands, that part of the trickiness is the documents didn't end up on the document where they were supposed to? How many people saw the executive summary of the document at the bottom of the agenda? How many people read that?
I must have. I printed everything.
Okay, so if you would have read that document, it would have explained why the resource was provided. The issue is in the actual IGA document, there are specifically assigned affordable housing and density numbers for each property.
They're actually called required.
Required. The question that has been asked 3 times in writing, Hannah answered the question and I sent it to her written, was other than the affordability of a house, of the AMI measure, what criteria are used for site selection? Because we know that people that we're trying to serve with affordable housing have different needs. Okay, so the question, bear with me, please. The question was, what are the criteria? And what we found from staff, we can't speak for the board because their discussions were in executive meeting. What we heard from staff and what we heard from Hannah from the county was no such criteria was used in the site selection for the properties in the IGA map. My feeling was, therefore, maybe as a task force, we should explore a recommendation that says, use some basic criteria before you decide that that's a good place for housing. For that reason, luckily, Victoria was able to find probably the best document that I've seen, and she provided, and I was providing that document to the task force to look at. Because in very simple, very clear, very easy to understand terms, it suggests different criteria for successful development of affordable housing. And that was the reason that document was in there. If we'd like to strike it from conversation, that's perfectly fine.
I think that explanation right there might be all we need to talk about in this meeting.
Correct.
And now people have that document, they can look at it. If that's questions, if those are questions they have, great. And we can make that recommendation that we want, what criteria you want the board to look at. But let's save our time in here. Is that,
yes,
does that capture things?
So is that a second?
I will second that.
Yeah.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? I don't think so. And Charlie's not here, so that's
Great.
unanimous.
So we all have it. And if you don't have that link, then Doug can certainly get it to you, but you can read the whole thing.
And I definitely see when it's.
At the bottom of the IGA
I
agenda
see it.
is the link to the executive summary. and it explains why that data might be interesting and why that data maybe should be considered by the task force.
Perfect, thank
Okay,
you.
it's a 2-pager, it's pretty easy. Any other agenda changes or shifts?
I don't know enough about how this is supposed to work to know if this is an agenda change or shift. I have a little table I'd like to submit. I don't know how that gets done.
My thought on that was when we're setting the agenda, I'll ask the same question I've asked every week. Is there any other data that people feel we need to be seeing? And you can mention it, we can put it in the minutes and then then it'll be distributed. But I don't think we can discuss it until it's been distributed. Right? At least that's my understanding. So we can talk, we can get it.
Well, let me know if
into the
it's a
flow.
problem. I mean, I don't know the rules, so.
I'll call you out when it's done.
And then if there's any other clarifications your group needs, I suggest you give them to trustee Hamrick to take back. You know, if you guys could further.
And on that note, can I add one
Yes,
thing?
please.
And this really, I'm glad Hannah's here, because a couple calls ago, I think her second call, she said, you know, we're kind of trying to overthink things, we're all over the place. And you're here, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you boiled it down to 2 simple facts. One was, what property should the town be interested in annexing? And then the second piece was, what would you do with it? Which in my world implies zoning, but it could be affordable housing, it could be resident, whatever, right? So I think framing that up, and was that accurate, how
I
you
thought it
said?
was pretty close to something I said, sort of. Which of the properties do you want to open the door to? And when they come through the door, what do you want the outcomes to be?
Yeah.
That are in the IGA, sort of a requirement that become legally enforceable through that IGA mechanism, our Porter County and the town's sort of agreement to that outcome. So affordable housing is in there on some properties. There are a couple others where I think we talk about maybe some ability to do utilities. So it's the affordable housing folks have, you know, we've talked a lot about that, I think, at this meeting, but there are other things that the IGA can achieve that we've tried to include in there, so.
Is there an understanding though that we can't ignore what's written in the document without providing some statement of whether we think it's right or wrong when it accounts to within.
Current IGA, not the
No,
draft.
the draft IGA, that, we're supposed to be evaluating the draft IGA. But the differences are shocking, yes.
Shocking.
But when it comes to the affordable housing topic, I know this isn't about affordable housing, you guys. It's never been about affordable housing, and I think Holly made that clear. I made it clear, and Holly and I talked about it before this started. But the fact that it's in the document and it's specified on every property means we don't have a choice but to say, is that a good specification? Is that an appropriate use for that, to call that out in the document? We may just say, no, it's not. You guys figure it out. That's fine.
But part of the
But we
definition,
can't ignore it.
but it's part of our definition though.
It's part of our definition
That's why it's
because
in
it's in the
there,
document.
right? And some of the Summit property is within that, plus some of the properties that we have been looking at, there is a question of it, and that's why it has been brought up. And so that's why even if we don't look at it now, it has to be looked at somewhere down the line, so we cannot procrastinate. So somewhere down this line, it has to,
Those are goals, yes, they're
Right.
goals of.
right. So that's why it's difficult, because there has to be some time taken to address it.
Yeah.
Okay,
So back to the agenda then. Are there any other changes? We struck that one item from further discussion. Are we on track for a presentation from fire and utility today? Is that those?
It was my understanding that you had reached out and that fire was gonna be here, but
Okay, well, let's scratch fire because that hasn't been set up. What about utility topic?
the same thing there. If
Okay.
you,
So we'll just scratch those 2 items. That brings us down to some open time. And we can discuss, either we can get into the wording of the agreement, if that's what you all want to do, or we can get into how we want to start to frame or capture our recommendations. However you guys want. If anybody wants to propose something for the agenda, we have lots of time.
Is that,
Can-
Is that where my table comes in?
Could be.
It's a table.
Well, I mean, let's finish the agenda.
Okay,
We're
I mean-
gonna we just need to know, do we want to add another agenda item, or do we want to just, because we don't have the two presentations we planned to have today. Does anybody want to make any more additional recommendations for the agenda?
I guess I do, because I think that's what we're talking
Okay.
about. I have a table that compares, the documents since 2012 IGA about the properties and what was considered appropriate use density designation through those times. And the thing about it is, they're all very different through those times. And the topography, the utilities, everything stayed the same. And yet the conclusions are, by the time you get to some of them, shockingly different. And to me, it's useful to look at the 4 conclusions from 4 documents that the people of Lyons have done or paid to have done. Because, you know, nothing's changed except the people's opinions. I don't think the erosion rates have been great, and I don't think we built a water tower or changed our utilities since then. So it's sort of enlightening to see over time.
Since 2012.
The 2000, yes, but the erosion hasn't changed the land, the wildlife hasn't changed its migration. Nothing's changed with the
Technology has
opinion.
changed the ability to do things
So
differently.
let's, can we just try to, let's see if we can get through our first task of
Okay,
approving
well,
the
I
agenda.
would like to put density as
Density
related
discussion.
through time in the opinion, and has anything changed?
Okay, does anybody want to second that?
Technology or whatever.
Do we need a second for that? Anybody want to second that? Is it a discussion topic?
Well, my tagline would be, when you went from a very comprehensive plan that lots of our neighbors understood in 2012 to something that's so small, and then brings out these density requirements per parcel. What if the landowner wants to sell to single-family home people? So why?
So can we put that as a-
goes with the,
Yeah, that's why I made the
I
table,
don't
because
understand.
I didn't get it.
I'm trying to get to the agenda, so I was asked to follow the rules, so we're trying to follow the rules. So we're trying to approve the agenda. So far, what we've done is we struck item 5B from the discussion list. We dropped the fire protection district because that wasn't, we haven't arranged it. We're not hearing from the utility matters, so we'll have to regroup and see if we want to try to get those on a later agenda. There's been I'll try to summarize Cindy the best I can, and Jen, I've tried to capture them both. There's been what do you call it, a motion to add a discussion of understanding the changes in density and how that impacts the IGA to today's discussion. Correct? Is that a fair, does anybody second that motion from Cindy?
I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor?
Yeah.
Any other discussion topics, any other changes to the agenda? If not, I'll be looking for a motion to approve that.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Very good. All in favor? All opposed? And,
I'll approve.
okay,
Yeah.
so it's unanimous. Okay, very good. Made it through that. We had on, now we have to talk about the minutes. So are there any questions, comments, discussion about the draft minutes from the last week?
I could not access them, so I could not review them. Anybody else able to access them?
I can show you how it is for people.
I went on, and
Yeah,
all I
you can
got
have
were,
my, yeah,
I got the topics, but nothing underneath them.
I think that's what we're talking about.
Any other questions, or while she's looking at that, any other comments, edits, questions on that? I will add a few then, if nobody else has any. On the bottom of page 1, 5, under the, where we had the discussion about annexation, the annexation cost. I think Andrew did a great job of explaining what is covered by the developer in terms of that cost, which is a lot of the staff time. We also had the addition that I would have in that discussion. We also discussed that The cost that is not covered is board and committee time, town resident time, and opportunity cost that is spent on the process.
I thought that's what the escrow was for.
No, that is, the escrow is to cover the time, staff time, trackable salaried staff. As I
Board and
understand it.
committee time, okay, got it.
But there's a lot of energy and time, I guess,
Got
that
it.
goes into it, so I want to make sure we don't lose that thought. On the second page, under 6, this is more of a call out for everybody. I think the quote from Andrew is really great and maybe is one of our first recommendations. That the best place to develop is always infill and urban redevelopment wherever it's possible, and that should be prioritized. I just thought that was well stated there, and I wanted to make sure that was there. I did receive notes under section 7 where we had site feedback. I did receive the notes from Charles that I will forward to you to Ed. I also will forward mine to Ed because I haven't forwarded those to you yet.
Do that too.
And Jen's. And I think, did anybody else have additional notes they want attached to the minutes?
Get mine.
I thought I got yours, but I'm not sure that it is.
I'll
You
try
might have to
again.
find yours, so I'm gonna have to send you on there too. So I will get those to Julie at the end of the meeting. Towards the end of, I guess was really in section 10 where we were brief discussing data collection. The discussion was with regards to data that has been requested that was forthcoming. Some of it is defined here, so instead of a brief discussion of blue line, it was a brief discussion of data documents and other requests is what that topic was. We received the blue line information that's been distributed. We received Marty's definition of highest and best use that's been distributed. And we received the density data from Andrew around the town and the executive comparison that went with that, and that's been distributed. We talked during this session, so this is in addition to the minutes. We talked about locating that criteria for affordable housing, what a site location should be. That's when Victoria was able to locate and provided that data. So that has been distributed with today's packet. That's the executive summary. Okay. That is all I had in terms of additions to. Yeah. Any further comments on, those you have a chance to do like an 8-second review?
Yes,
Any
sir.
further comments on the minutes from last week?
Seems like maybe. Yeah, on the summary you gave of my notes, you had private property should stay rural preservation. I actually think I put should be taken out of the,
Oh, I thought it was rural
area.
preservation now,
um,
so be taken out of
just
the
taking
IGA.
it, just put it back in Boulder County, because with those 2 ravines and private easement.
Taken
Yeah,
out of the
there's
IGA.
Yeah, there's easement right on top of it too,
Easements, the bridge.
conservation.
Conservation.
I got the change, I will make it.
Can I suggest, this is something you guys haven't talked about yet, but when we know we have a parcel who is, even if you don't want to reclassify it. We have a lot of these parcels are adjacent to the town, they're using town services, they consider themselves lines. And the town is not getting any property or sales tax from them, it's all going to the county. So we have to remember too, that if there's a possibility they could still annex, even if it doesn't change anything, that could still be beneficial to the town in our IGA negotiations. So I'm thinking of some of those commercial properties. Look at the Lucas, for example. I mean, we get absolutely nothing other than a lot of traffic and maybe a few meals out of workers in a day. But you know, those parcels, you might want to consider leaving them in the planning area. So if anybody ever wants to annex them as is, they can as well. And might get a benefit of some property tax or sales tax from the business. Like the marijuana place, Tebow put his annexation on hold because he just bought that one too. He contacted us and said, not gonna annex it, we're gonna leave it ag in the county.
You're talking about the,
Because of the tax.
As of right now.
Oh, because it's.
So I mean, just keep that in mind as we're talking about these parcels. I know some of you were a little concerned, it's kind of awkward when the county's at the table, but it's okay. I mean, those are just facts.
Or another example is when the county wanted to put in a gun range. The town people said no.
Yeah, so there might be a reason to still leave it on the IGA map, even if there's not an intent to ever do anything with it, in case its current use or user would want to bring it in.
Well, and looking at it in the gun ranges, that's a good example. The IGA previously for those properties up there said something like a specific number of list of uses, none of which were residential.
Right.
Right, so
Right.
now the IGA says you do residential in these areas, so it's changed, but that's a good example of how the IGA sort of gives everybody some surety about what may or may not happen.
I think the Boone parcel is another one. They it feels like they're in Lions, they say they were from, what I mean, but we don't get even property tax from that use, or, there are some, I don't know if there's like, but just keep that in mind.
Victoria?
Can we,
I'm sorry.
can we just, let's try to get through one little task of approving our minutes from last week. So are there any other discussions on minutes? Please say no. Does anybody want to make a motion that we approve the minutes? Please say yes.
I will make a motion to approve this.
Does anybody want to second that motion? Second, the minutes are approved with the addition
With a bunch
of
of
the
changes.
documents, with the documents that we'll send to you on people's.
And all these other.
Okay.
Should we vote? Don't you have to vote?
No, those are
just-
just comments on the
Just have to
minutes.
do
This
one
is
and
not
two,
an
that's
action
it,
item.
okay.
This is me. I'm gonna go back, edit the minutes and
Okay,
then send them back.
so
out.
that takes us down the list then to our now open, only an open discussion topic, and that can either start with the question you were about to ask, or you can start with your density.
Yeah, I guess I'd like to start with the question I was gonna ask you, Victoria. If you leave something like the Connor property on, the reason I was sort of radical is take it off is
Yeah.
because it seems really obvious that it's not the most appropriate place to ever build anything more than that's there. So how in perpetuity do you keep it rural preservation if we get it back there? Because I feel like everything keeps getting reinvented without looking what they did before.
Uh-huh.
And some things we passed around, I don't know if it's can I give them copies from the table? I don't know if it's legal.
No, it's fine.
It's fine, we're communicating.
Just have to put
Yeah,
it in
it's
the
easier to look at a piece of paper,
Yeah.
right? So it's just, that's why I was radical, take it off, because
Oh, no, I
I
understand
feel
why
like
you
in
did. I
looking
just
at the
wanted to
history, that like there's not a long enough memory to know why something was done. So if you just look at a flat piece of paper like the map we have for the IGA map, you don't see all, or maybe the IGA map should have like little footnotes on every place so that the wheel doesn't go round and round back over the same territory every time.
Like the no
Somebody
development
wants,
stuff.
I mean, it's just over and over because, oh yeah, I forgot, there's 2 ravines and it's steep and only this part would have been developable anyway, and there's a wildlife corridor on both sides. I feel like everything, I can't believe how much stuff I've had to read just to catch up to what's been done and forgotten.
is there another way to get up there besides the way we went up? Is it possible in the future there's another way to get up there?
That's what I was saying.
If you have money to do it, sure, there's always.
On both sides of John Connor's house, there's a deep ravine. So it takes a big, heavy bridge that doesn't cause too much wildlife.
There's that one lane bridge we saw.
Yes, that's on that side.
That's on that side, man. What I'm saying,
There's another
Is-
road on the other.
The other
No, there's
side,
not another.
Oh, I
road.
thought that was
There's
part of the
an-
plan that they had.
there's
No,
not
we
a
would
road.
have to go across 2
So there could-
ravines and
yeah.
a
two.
park,
to the
2
top of Long
ravines
Street.
and private property
So-
that belongs to
so-
the HOA over there.
okay, so there's not, so if you're looking at it in the future, and I mean way in the future, there's not another entrance or another way to get up there besides that road we went on.
I guess it depends who, I mean, again, they probably never thought where the house was developable, but if you have enough money to build the bridge, it is. Well, it's hard to say that.
And if I
Actually,
may-
you can't- it's not a
But
yes
see,
or no.
that's not exactly factual, because I went to Boulder County and we pulled all the paper records from the planning commission last week on the development of the county property. And interestingly enough, because if they're all paper from that point,
Sure.
interesting enough, one of the letters was from me to Boulder endorsing and embracing the plan because it had been so well conceived
Yeah.
by Boulder County and John as to where that house should be and
Yes,
why, so that it didn't destroy that land.
sure.
And so this is a question for you, Hannah, that actually came from Mayor Rogan this morning. If the county and the county worked so hard to get Mr. Connor to put that house in the right place with the road that goes over the ravine, which is also open space, to not endanger the wildlife. They were very specific in all the planning documents about where the road should be, the driveway, should be to minimize the grade. If that was important, and we thought it was important enough to call it rural preservation before, why is the county now allowing us to even contemplate fairly higher, twice the density of housing than we have anywhere else in the town of Lyons? Why would the county allow that to happen?
Well, it's a really good question, and not necessarily an easy answer. I think most of the properties all of the properties that are contemplated to be added to this IGA from the last time are areas of incremental growth at the edge of the town of Lyons where facilities may be provided. The IGA and the approach to growth and development in Boulder County has not been no growth, never, ever, ever, right?
And I don't think that's the feeling of this town, or certainly not myself.
Well, so let me finish. Why we may agree to these changes is because we recognize that the town has needs and those evolve and change over time. I think if this property were in the county and we weren't anticipating, we would apply our same site plan review criteria and standards. What you're trying to do as the town is to decide what's appropriate if and when this parcel urbanizes.
With a site plan review, so considering
Well,
basic
not
information, right?
our,
Yeah, but
but
you're
your
recommending
town.
that the town do that with some basic site plan review process, which makes complete sense.
Well, no, I mean, a true redevelopment of this property would be way more intensive than our county site plan review process. That's a pretty heavy lift to, do an annexation and a development of this property. Like,
And if I may, it's important, again, to understand kind of the sequence of events here. Secondary access, drainage, stormwater issues, utility, fire, all of these big concepts we're talking about, those get folded into our subdivision review process. So we have standards and criteria that have to be met by every subdivision request. Secondary, safety, if we get a comment back from the Lions Fire that this isn't gonna work, then we're not held to their comments, but it's historically been the town's approach and most municipalities to follow those very stringently. So those are all part of this process. All of this isn't outlined in the annexation process.
And I agree with Victoria in the sense that she's saying, leave the process of whatever you're really asking for in the IGA, because you never know what's going to happen in the future. And with technology, and depending on what cost is, and like I said, technology, and the way they're doing stuff, AI these days, you never know, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, the technology might allow the cost to say, hey, we can do this road now, or we can do this way, or we can do this at a certain way. So the way we're looking at things now, and we're saying we can't do Fifth Avenue, we can't do Cornell, but in the future, maybe we can. Because with the way we look at it now, and we look at these roads and the accessibility to certain things, it looks like it's impossible. Am I right or wrong?
Oh, you're right.
You know, but like I said, in the future, futuristically, we could have air cars, or we could be flying cars. You know what I'm saying? I hate to say it this way, but
Yeah.
you know, when we looked at, when we read the book years ago in 1984 at Animal Farm, we didn't think we were gonna have cameras everywhere and have to have IDs, but look where we are now, okay? Excuse me, guys, I have to go to this major VA appointment. I love you guys.
Yes.
I know Douglas will fill me in. Thank you for bringing up that IGA thing, because I think it's important, even though we'll keep it in.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I just want one other comment about Conard. The other reason that parcel even came on our radar was there was a request by the current owner
Mhm.
to annex. Even if it stays as it is, if they want to annex, they won't be able to if it's zoned, if it's in the RP.
Yes.
Well, yeah, but it's in there right now for low to medium density and required. And medium density for that area is not very medium. So again, I think there's like this thing, right? There's the map itself, which doesn't necessarily create such emotional or, you know, litigation issues. And then there's the document. And the document takes a map that looks like, well, maybe there'll be a house or two more. And it turns it into, maybe it'll be a lot of buildings there.
What if you took the house that was there, cut it up into, I mean, it's a 7,000 plus square foot house, right?
Yeah.
Created living quarters for 10 seniors and made it a senior living complex.
You'd still have to figure out how to get across the ravine.
I get that. I'm saying,
But I'm
that's
just
not what,
saying,
you're
it's,
missing my point.
it's requiring a pretty
That's-
high level of density in the written
But
document.
that's the same.
So can we pause there a second? Because I think we may be misinterpreting the written document. So if that's,
The written document is stuff.
The draft
Definitely
document.
needs to be,
Edited.
Which I think would be a perfect segue, because that's where Wendy wanted to go as well, and I know that's what Jen's working on notes. Before we do that, do you want to just say any last comments on your spreadsheet?
Yeah,
And
if
then
you
we'll-
wanna look at
Will be a
it
smooth
sometime,
transition, so we don't lose it.
the properties Boone, Carpenter and Connor all put together, cause they basically have tracked pretty much together. Although Connor, there, doesn't go all the way back in history, so he used a Long Peaks property for the history part, because it was similar. Hawkins, Lucanen, and then Arcalis, also called Beehive. If you go back farther, they changed the names. So this is the designations for each of these: IGA 2012, 2014 housing site, Lions Thrive, and the 2024 IGA draft. And many of them go from, you know, don't even put it in the, you know, just put it in and don't really do anything with it unless it's rural preservation, to suddenly up to medium density. And when you look at how it's defined in the IGA that were draft, it's pretty high density. Because as I think I remember Victoria saying, a unit is not a single family house, it's a building, and that could be whatever.
No.
So-
No, that's not accurate. One
Hey.
building could be 6 units, if there's 6
Okay,
units in a building.
so still, if you have 12 units with the number of,
Could be
that's
one
a,
building with 12 units
that's
in
a
it.
lot,
Could be
right?
12 different units, 12 buildings, or one building
Right,
with 12
so
units.
it's up to, medium density can be pretty high
It could be up to 12.
for that location,
Per acre,
per acre.
and that's a lot of acres.
For that location, it's pretty high. And I'm only talking about this one, the ravines, the private property, the easements on the road that's there through private property, which I haven't gone and pulled their deeds, but most easements for a driveway are just residential easements. It's got a lot not in its favor that no other property that is on here has in the same way. And it went from rural preservation to, I mean, you can call it medium density, but because the way the units work, it's not just a few people. Anyway, that's how the
Thank you
table
for
works, and
sharing
if you
that.
want to follow the history of what people have thought about the site that hasn't changed its geology and physiology or graphing, that's an easy way.
And David had brought up a couple meetings back when we were, before we went on our tour, about the missing potential agreement, which would be the estate, 1 per acre, or the ag 1 per 5 acres. And so why did this go to what it is on this?
So again, I just want to clarify kind of the thought process of clustering. We use any of these properties, say example, we've got 30 acres to work with, 1 acre estate. It's just about what the community wants. And then it's trying to balance that against what we have in the comp plan. So using the Connor property, I think it's 38 acres, somewhere in there. We could have responsibly if again,
If you presume it's flat.
Yeah, it's
Let's-
not on
Let's
that
start with that
property.
But again,
presumption,
that-
because you know that's a lot.
but it's not. All over the Mountain West, people can build on whatever slope they want to. If you have money,
And the
you
time.
can do it. So saying that that's an inaccurate statement is inaccurate. I mean,
Except it's, by town,
So-
we have an ordinance of 25%, if I'm correct.
And
I'm
there's
sure
private
PCDC
property
can
on both
confirm that.
sides that you have to get across, and a couple of wildlife corridors.
and again, I'm not talking about the Connor property.
Well, I am, that's
Oh.
really all I'm
Well,
saying about this one.
I think we need to let people make them
Sorry.
finish their points. We're not letting people finish their points all across the board. And that, to me, is very frustrating. So Andrew has the floor. Let's let him finish. And then the other thing I think we're doing is we're getting a little bit down a rabbit hole on one topic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so the idea behind clustering, again, is with 1 acre estates, you could have, we'll go conservative, you got 15 lots up there. With different issues, utilities and roadways, call it 30. And again, it's, as a community, is it 30 big houses that you can see from all over town? That's not what the comp plan says. The comp plan says, let's try to cluster. Let's try to bring things outside of fireways. Let's try to bring it away from riparian corridors or migration routes. So that's what that is doing, is clustering that development. And that's it. And that's the reason why, and the reason why those percentages are there. Again, these are to set expectations for a developer, that if you're going to develop this property, this is what the community expects out of affordability. Whether or not that happens is,
It doesn't required,
I
so
understand.
honestly.
Yeah.
It's
So
up to
maybe
the
I
document.
can jump in here a little bit.
Okay.
So the way, she is correct, that it does say low to medium density required. So that low to medium density in this document is defined. Another way to read that would be high density is not permitted.
Mhm.
So I think what you're saying, what this is saying is this is the density range that is required in here. It doesn't dictate a specific number within that range. What it does say is not high density. Is
And
that-
not,
Some.
and then I'll let y'all
Not
discuss.
with the neighbors and the access on the roads.
And not with the letter of the document, and I feel like I'm fighting a losing battle because I think people haven't looked at the document. The document does very specifically say 6 to 12 housing units per acre, a minimum of 6, and on this, the low has a minimum of 6 and a maximum of 6. The medium has, I think, a low of 10 and a maximum of 12 or
6 to
something
12.
like that.
Yeah, I actually
It
put
is
it on
in
the
there, so
table
we
at the
can't-
bottom.
We can't pretend it's not in there. We can't just say, okay, well, let's just assume that 6 to 12 is appropriate without applying just a tiny bit of common rationale to where it is and what's around it. If you take Steamboat, since everybody seems to be pretty focused, and it could be any one of those 3 properties. If you use the data that planners use on population, and let's just keep simple math. If you look at the housing that's in the Steamboat Valley within the town limits, there's, I didn't bring the exact number, but I want to say there's 39 houses. It comes out to roughly 100 people. If we were to follow the low end of the recommendations that are required in the IGA for either the Boone or the Carpenwood or the Connor property, which are all roughly 5 acres, we're gonna add a population of 70 to 140, give or take. A couple of people here or there. we're gonna increase the population in that area and the road and everything by that level, which we haven't done anywhere in town on any property, even our most dense density within the town of Lyons, based on Andrew's numbers, which I really appreciate, is like 3.5 or 4. And so the only thing I'm saying, I'm not saying we have to decide what that is. We all agreed on day one. We probably won't have specific recommendations, but I think we can decide, wow, that feels odd. Maybe there should be some basic criteria that the board should look at before they allow a property to even be considered for annexation, because the cost to the town is significant, as Andrew pointed out, in terms of the time and energy of an application. The amount of emotional energy, the opportunity cost that we would lose by fighting annexation for the next 10 years would be astronomical. Maybe we say, okay, fine, that's available for annexation, but don't handicap the landowner so much to put something that's so impractical that it would never happen. And that's, I think, where we have to get to with our recommendations, is what can we recommend that they can act on? Not what do we think personally, but what can we recommend based on what's written in the document? And it's written that there's a requirement, the minimum quantities or density is written, the maximum density is written. We have to look at that data. We can't ignore it.
I was just gonna say, though, I think, at least from a BOT perspective, it would be good to get this group's recommendations, okay? And so what's written here is a draft. You can throw the draft out the window and say, counter property, leave it at, we're willing to annex it, but leave the single family home there, or whatever you want to say. So if this group could arrive at that consensus.
Right.
For the following reasons, fire, wildlife corridor, blah, 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 blah. But, so, because it seems like we're getting hung up on the density discussions, and if you don't agree with the density, throw it out the window and come up with your own definitions. And there are already definitions in the existing zoning, which may be a good place to start. So that's just one thought, instead of getting hung up on densities and whether that's appropriate for some of these properties.
I have a question for Hannah. It's a legal question about zoning. Do you have?
So just let me interrupt.
Uh-huh.
I sent a note to Brandon, which I haven't seen the answer yet.
Okay.
Which I think is was, does zoning take precedence, or does what's specified in the IGA?
Well,
Question.
yeah, I mean, that's
so
a big question in my mind. And if we don't have a property in the IGA and somebody wants to rezone their property in Boulder County, can they do that? Like, say Tebow's ag, right now, where he's at. Can he go to the county and say, I'd like to rezone this as a commercial district property in Boulder County? And then we don't get any of the commercial tax dollars off of that.
Theoretically, people can request the upzoning of their individual property. Generally, it's not supported.
Okay, but it is doable. Like, from what I read before I came in, it's possible, but probably not probable.
Correct.
Okay,
The avenue that is legally there in our code for someone to make that request. It's just almost never meets the criteria for an upzoning. Mainly because zonings and rezoning, like we just did out east, is supposed to represent, a community's vision for the future and create a community benefit,
sure.
not an individual property benefit.
Okay.
So we usually zone according to plans and
and all those properties just got downzoned, and I think that just encourages them to jump to Lyons and say, hey, upzone me.
Yeah.
And
Would
those
be my
aren't
guess.
really things, right? So we haven't really complained or
So I
you know,
was
given
thinking
any data.
mostly of like the Harkless property, that's just outside of town this way. That could be potentially used as a commercial property also, you know, coming into town or out of town.
Or mixed use.
Right, or mixed use, yeah. Well, which is commercial can be used, mixed use,
We
so.
didn't do a tour, I'm not too sure.
I just
We didn't
What's it-
go over
where's
wondered.
it? I know.
On Highway
roughly-
7.
It's the
Is it
beehive.
One with
Where are the
the
beehives?
Whether or
bees and the
not-
grateful bit.
It's
Dancing
Um,
bears.
What's the question about the Harkowitz piece?
I'm just thinking out loud now.
I don't know what that one's zoned in the county off the top of my head, maybe it's forestry or
I
ag.
think it's
I
bad.
think it's ag.
Yeah, so that piece, is one of those, we did a little bit of cleanup. I would call that a cleanup
Yeah,
of the boundary out there, right? That parcel's not big enough to do a whole lot different than what's being
right.
going on out there in the county. If it does ever, if those folks ever want to do something, property owners down the line, it makes sense for that redevelopment to happen in town, not in the county.
Right.
So then I think with the IGA now, though, delineates sort of what that should be
Yeah, it does.
rather than
Right,
commercial
leaving it
or,
to-
you know,
yeah.
leaving
It's in
it
its
to
medium
up the
and high
unknown.
density right now.
Yeah, because it's just a tough commercial property, you know,
It
it's
is.
small, you know, it's got multiple, small,
We looked at. it for
Intersections
affordable housing a
around.
while back.
it'd be tough for a commercial project.
What I wondered is like, is it like right on the highway? That's
Yeah.
why, I was like,
Mhm.
so it might, I
Right
mean,
next
that's
to
more
the
likely
houses.
commercial, right? Cause
Yep.
it's like right on the highway, so
Well,
people
not
in and off.
Really.
It's
Yeah.
still disjointed.
It's kind of a weird, yeah, it would be a weird
That
story.
would be a
Because in our town, I don't wanna get out of my place online on the highway unless there's a really compelling reason. So that's why I wondered if it was easy on, easy off, you know?
So, if you guys would indulge me, and this is a thumbs up, thumbs down thing, but I was trying to think, how do we begin to figure out what, and David asked me the same question, how are you going to help the team get to identify what it is they want to recommend, or what's important to even be considered? One of the approaches I thought, and we could do it, or we could throw it out, but this is just sort of an example. So I took each of the properties or groups of properties in question. So we have the east corridor, which I'm really considering everything east of the intersection down there. So it's on the right and left side of 66. We have the Lucanen A, which is the part at the summit. It's marked as A on the other maps. The Lucanen B, which is the part that we visited, for those that got to go on the tour, the Stone Yard, Harkins, Harlicus, Connor, Carpenter, Boone. And then just for reference, I put what's in the IGA today in terms of density per acre, what the percentage of affordable housing overlay is on it, and approachable housing overlay in the total. But then maybe we go, what is important for the board to consider? Because we don't know what the board has considered, because the only meetings where it was talked about in depth was executive session, and we can't be discussed. Next week, Holly's willing to come in and talk to us about the process, but the specific attributes, we have no idea what's been considered. So if it makes sense to you guys, we could go like, what's important? Is the blue line important? Is that something we should be thinking about? Is it a high importance or low importance? And which properties might it affect? Maybe it's wildlife, maybe it's health and safety issues like stormwater runoff or fire, maybe it's traffic impact, water, walk shed. I learned this term recently, which is really the distance to walk to the social services from a particular parcel. And there's probably, you all probably have a million different things. Would this be a way to try to go what's important and what's not? And we can kind of think about it, we don't have to discuss it, debate and resolve it, but kind of think about the things we should be going after. Does anybody have any other idea of how we might approach getting our ideas sort of on paper and sort of focused a little, because I'm wide open ideas.
I mean, this isn't answering your second question at all, but my hope in trying to get the annexation presentation, the fire presentation, and the utilities presentation was those should be considered for every single property. And then that would help me understand how are they considered? I just wanted to know, because to me, every annexation, and my understanding is, and every annexation does get reviewed for utilities, for fire, for traffic. So sure, those should be considered, but are those already built into the process? I think they are, and that was why I wanted to have those presentations, so we didn't have to get into that, so that we would understand that that gets done once someone applies to annex. We don't have to say, hey, town, consider fire risk, because guess what? They have no choice. They have to consider fire risk. The fire and I don't think the fire chief is gonna go, yes, build here because it's really dangerous and it's gonna make my job impossible. So I was hoping to eliminate this by giving us information about the fact that this is done. This is already done. So town, follow your process. And do we need to prescribe exact density levels? I don't know if we do. Maybe we just say no high density here. And then let the rest of it trickle
Because
down.
it really is the text, right?
I think some of this can
Right,
be,
it's
I mean, look,
density
I
tax.
want all the affordable housing we can get. That's my bias, and I don't know that putting it in here at this level of specificity is what needs to happen. Are there not other goals? We have other ways, I mean, if we want that Prop 123 money, we damn well better come up with 3 houses every year.
Yeah.
If we want, I mean, there's money out there that we can get from the state and the feds, that's great, and does it have to be in here? I want it in here personally. Does it have to be in here? I don't know. It sounds like.
Sorry, I was gonna answer one
I
question.
think for the reason it is in there is because the town right this minute doesn't have an infrastructure that otherwise require developers to provide it.
Yeah.
Somebody mentioned in one of the discussions, the Longmont IGA, and why isn't this stuff in the Longmont IGA? Well, it's not in the Longmont IGA because Longmont has already an inclusionary zoning requirement. So that's why we felt if the town alliance wants this as an outcome and doesn't have other methods in place already to require it, the IGA is a way to require it.
Are there, like, does the town have the ability to make there other ways that can we pass? I know we have all these plans and all these things that aren't legally binding. Can the Board of Trustees propose that we do something in a separate way? Is there an ordinance or is there a zoning change? Is there something else we can do to accomplish this, but not have it in the IGA? Because everyone's head's exploding because it's in the IGA.
Yeah, we're working right now, on several housing code fronts. Inclusionary zoning though is tough, you know? And this is a great way to have inclusionary zoning, but not it be codified, you know, for property owners that are already within town. So what this does, it gives the town inclusionary zoning, but it's not affecting our current property owners. So that's a true benefit to me. So it's almost like a tourist tax, right? You're not levying these taxes on your people, it's the people that are coming in. And that's why it's somewhat good that it's in the IGA and not in our code, because then it affects everyone. At some point, it probably, you know,
Okay.
Colorado
But that's why
changes.
this was seen as a elegant way to do it without having to change everyone's zoning right now. It just affects those. Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense. That helps.
And then to clear up just one other question, the density, that's our R1 zoning right now, 7,000 square foot lots. So using our lowest density outside of a state, using our lowest density that gets applied often to other residential projects, those are 7,000 square foot lots, and that's 6 units per acre.
And let me just say, we've been working on inclusionary zoning since 2018 here,
Okay,
so.
so this is why.
Yeah.
Couple things, what you said, so, I mean, kind of from both sides. You're having, like the developers, 25% this, 25% that, 50% that. That is not necessarily the same thing as a density number, right? Could you not?
Oh, those are
Meet
two
in the
different things,
halfway,
like the
right?
affordable
They're
housing and the
different
density,
things.
two different-
You have
completely
to
different.
do 25, 25, 50, and you can't make up to X density, right? because they're not really, I don't think anybody's arguing about putting affordable housing anywhere. I think they're arguing about density that is so different.
Sure.
And even if you calculate it by taking the average acres and putting it onto 5, you've still density loaded an area in a way it isn't already there. So maybe a little of everything, right?
Sure.
I know that's gonna make it less affordable for them if they can't have a lot of density,
Yeah.
but if they really wanna build there.
So can I just ask the question I've asked every meeting? Why do we have an IGA that calls out, what, 6, 7 specific addresses? It doesn't actually call out the eastern corridor with requirements, but all the other potential annexation areas are not called out. And I think that's why a lot of our neighbors are freaking out. And we also have a property on here that's not interested anymore, and their original plan with the town goes back to what you put on here with one of these previous.
Well, it is a 20-year document. They might be interested in 18 years. We have
Yeah,
to
you're
think very
right.
long.
Their kids may go to college.
Well, that keeps it in the IGA area, but it doesn't necessarily say, hey, let's make it high. I don't even know what property we're talking about, but it doesn't necessarily, put the density numbers on there. It might put the
Well, right.
kind of
Why
buildings
can't
or
they
the
be like
amount.
Apple Valley and just be yellow without requirements?
Right,
That's what they ask.
yeah,
Why can't we just be like Apple Valley?
yeah.
Well, I mean, Apple Valley, should it come to the town, those aren't, isn't eminent. First of all, it's not even really.
That's what she's saying. It doesn't have a bullseye on it.
Right, I think that these, from what I've understood, and correct me if I'm wrong, we have property owners who are interested now in annexation and development.
2 out of 3 of those property owners are very interested in the projects, just like these. I don't mean projects as in the project.
No,
Development proposals, just like
honestly,
these.
I don't think anybody here thinks any affordable housing is
Sure.
is like the projects. I think it's a density
Yeah.
issue purely, not who's in the house.
And that's the balance, right? To have enough, what's enough density to make the development viable and economically feasible? Because if he only got 4 units and you're held to 2 market rate and 1 affordable, 1 attainable, the money's not there, so it's never gonna get done, and that's fine if it doesn't. But in trying to play that development game, that's why you're going to, not and not the town, but whatever,
Let's
you
put it on
have
the
to create that
developer.
density.
Oh, I can try to respond to
Can-
that one.
Okay.
Oh, Martin,
Well,
can you
Martin's
answer
been trying to
Oh,
say
go ahead,
something.
Laura.
to this question?
Yeah.
I had similar questions when we were in our work sessions with the county and the commissioner. And it really came down to, if we are going to take a property from rural preservation into an urbanized area, the county has very, they have goals regarding affordable housing and more dense housing for use. Why would they, from the county's perspective, there's not a benefit of letting a house come in as a single house. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Into town. So we had this discussion because I remember we asked the same thing. Why do we have to put density on these? And it really was because it's a goal of the counties. Why would they let a rural preservation property come in to town when they could preserve it as rural preservation unless it's meeting some of their other goals as well? And the commissioners have,
Well, I mean, I think that's one thing that the IGA represents is what are the town's goals around housing and what are the county's goals around housing? And how do we put both of those things in a document that does what we both want it to do, right?
but I do understand why with the Eastern Corridor and Apple Valley not having those numbers on it, I
Right.
can see why that was scary for the neighbors. Where we know that we have other places in town too that we could infill and do that.
Well, in the Eastern Quarter, I think the expectation is a lot of that will be commercial. But I mean, you could, I think, if that is an issue or a question that I'm just now understanding, so thank you. I mean, if it were a general recommendation, you could,
Just to turn it yellow.
or
People would
have
be
all
okay.
properties subject to the same
Yeah,
affordable
that's what I was
housing
gonna say.
requirements that they annex.
Yeah, exactly, Rose.
In a different policy, right?
Right, it would have to be an ordinance at that point.
I know it's been a while. Do you remember the question?
Well, it's basically, more of a process statement than a question, and back to what you were saying with this, I think, I don't know, a lot of this stuff is very confusing and gray, and we've seemed to spend 3 or 4 meetings trying to understand it all thoroughly, and I hope we're getting closer. I know I am, but I believe that we're diving a little bit too deep into the minutia. And what we need to start with is the list of the properties. There's a couple that we would like updates on, the Tamburello properties on the north and south side of the eastern corridor, seeing what their plans are, so they would conform to whatever we might recommend in the Tebow property. My point being is we need a big spreadsheet, basically, with all the properties, all the criteria, and then a rating system, and we can see how they rate out. And then from there, we can start applying some of these parameters that we keep discussing. But we have to get to the point where we have pinpointed or excluded some of those properties. And that, to me, where we have to go next.
So how do we start to identify
I think
those,
we rate them.
kind of like we're doing, you mean?
Yeah, the blue zone.
Yeah.
Fire, view shed, wildlife, all of those things. Highest and best use. We could have, as you said, a whole list on the side, and yes, high, medium, low, whatever criteria we want to apply to those.
Julie made a very good
I feel like
point
my
about-
ratings are useless.
What's that?
My ratings are useless in fire. I don't know. I am not a fire professional. I would say that's a high priority for every single one. I would say water is a high priority for every single one. Traffic, high priority for every single one. Make sure the town does what they're doing. So that's where I struggle with that, because I don't know.
So the only thing then, let's just follow that thread, because I think you're both saying really, really important things, but just to pull that thread. So if we're saying that we don't have the expertise to make a decision, we already said that, we're not gonna make any exact decision on any property. But we wanna make sure it's recognized, or at least we're putting a recommendation that, look, there's 4 or 5 key things that need more than a tertiary look to even decide if a property should be eligible. And I don't think you have to do big studies to do it. You can run slope line maps. We know what our ordinance for building on, we know what recommendations for building affordable housing on. Does it fit? Does it fit? We know what's in the IGA, so we can specifically talk to that. We know what the density things are. We can either say, don't put it in there, or modify it, or do whatever. We know what the affordable housing percentages are. We can talk to that if we want to. And then the other would be these couple of, maybe it's the big bucket items that we're most concerned about, or some people are and some people aren't concerned about. Is that where we're going? Does that make sense? Are we getting to
It's
a
something.
process?
It's, I mean,
I
you're
gotta
never.
try to figure out, how do we start to make progress? Because I think everybody in this group has come up to speed at different levels. I feel like mostly everybody here today is really well informed. I know some people have done a lot more research than others, but some people came in with a lot of, Wendy came in with years and years and years of background history on this, so she didn't need to be educated on it.
I'm less concerned about the parcels that are in there, because I honestly think they all should be it on some level. And more concerned about the actual wording of the document,
Yes.
the legal, the words they can read.
So are those two, should we take those as
Not
two
the
different
map.
buckets? One, the actual document, and should we take that first or second? And the other is the knowns about the property, what's stated in the document about the
Yeah.
property.
They're definitely two different things.
Is that a way to do it?
Yeah.
And which do we think is gonna be easiest? Because that's the one we should take first.
I think frankly, the map's gonna be easiest, because I
The
think if
map
we're
is
putting a
super
bunch
easy.
of conditions and recommendations, all of these parcels have potential for annexation, and why would we wanna cut off our foot and take any of them out?
Mhm.
And then we put conditions on what they are, so maybe the map conversation is relatively quick. And then the details, the devil's in the details, as they say.
Yeah,
We've spent a lot of time on the maps
Yeah.
already.
I mean, I will say right now, I think all of them should be considered for annexation, and it's just a matter of what are the considerations. So I'll open that up as a, I mean, if there are people who disagree with that and say, don't consider it at all, then then it's a longer conversation.
Well, Julie, I can agree with that, but before I was hearing no considerations. And if you can attach considerations so that Connor can be left
I think we can
relatively
get into the weeds on the
available.
considerations,
I could
but
agree with what you're saying about the map.
do we all
I
generally
with
agree that
you.
these could potentially be annexed if we had comfort and considerations and things that were identified versus pulling them out of consideration ever for the next 20 years?
And we're not making that
Don't-
decision.
Right.
but-
Annexing means more than housing.
But,
Yeah,
but
I do realize, but then
there's
it
some
also is that
consideration,
level
right?
of what
But-
could happen if they
There
do.
have to be.
I think what Cindy's saying is, what I'm hearing Cindy say, that I think ties to what you're saying is, if, and I think it's kind of what Martin said, if there are big bucket considerations, that really, we want to make sure that we as a team say, you might have looked at this already, but please take a very close look at this, that, or the other thing. That feels like we should capture that, right?
Yeah, I
Not
think,
what the solution is, but what they should look at.
right, the concerns attached and, like it rates great with walkability, but it's horrible with access, which makes no sense. For example, it could be very high in one category and very poor in another, like it's in the view shed or whatever. So I think if we had a breakdown of that, then we can, start on the words, but I feel like we're pretty far along. Everybody has good knowledge of most of the parcels we've considered. So it doesn't seem like it would be that much more work just to kind of have and some of them will stand out as much more developable than others.
Yeah, and that's what, I just took an example just to get it started when I was trying to draw this out, and I took the blue line, and I said, that's probably all agree, and to your point, everything's a high priority, I get that. So maybe that's irrelevant, that was more for how close are we to consensus, right? But does it apply to the east corridor? Really doesn't. They're below the blue line, there's plenty of water pressure, they're close to.
Parts of them, well, I guess you
East
could,
corner.
yeah, all the way out.
Does it apply to the Buchanan A property? I don't think so. I think it's well within the blue line, if I recall correctly. The B property, which is the stone yard, definitely is within the blue line. Hawkins, part of it is well in the blue line and the upper part is well outside of it. So I don't know where if the other ones in the blue line or not. Connor, Carpenter, and Boone are all significantly above the blue line. So if we could do it like that, well, we're not saying we're gonna fix the problem, but when you look at it, look at these properties, because this is a big issue on 3 of the 4 properties. Does that work?
Makes
I mean,
sense to
I'm-
me. Yeah, because then, because Summit isn't an issue.
Is that the right approach?
I mean, yeah, I'm just more worried about the
And then we'll come back to the words, because I think everybody.
stipulations. I mean,
Yeah.
again, the annexation process is already doing all of that, so I don't think that that's necessary.
And
But
here's another thought I'll throw out to the team, you guys can think about it. So when we do this, we're gonna make as a group recommendations, however we get there, we're gonna make it. I think and it specifically calls out in our charter that if there's not consensus, I hate to use the word opposing view, but alternative view,
yeah.
the different views should be put out there. I think we should plan right now with every recommendation we make to say, here's the recommendation, and here's some thoughts that are opposing that recommendation. However we want that to come about, we can decide whether we want to put names into those or not, but so let's not limit ourselves whether or not we can agree, 8 to 0 on something. Let's just get the big bucket things that people feel are concerning, and then let's try to move this process along.
So going back to your chart, annexing a property if you're not changing the use of the property, but we're collecting all the sales tax from their business or all the property tax from their property, none of that stuff matters, right?
What do you mean you're not changing?
Those will all
use?
be moot points. These people already have houses and businesses on these properties, but if they were annexed in, we receive some tax dollars.
That is not a moot point.
Yeah, no.
That is the biggest
That's
point
the
of
whole
all of it.
No, it does matter because they could sell in 3 years, so,
They
know,
could subdivide and change everything.
yeah,
right?
properties change, so just, again, just because it's a bucket.
But it's a good point. It
Yeah,
doesn't mean annexation doesn't mean changing the use.
No, it
at all.
doesn't.
just
Not
means
necessarily.
annexing
It does have the impact on town of being attached to utilities and sewage and
If they're,
streets
yeah,
and all that, street maintenance.
but it doesn't necessarily change density and there may not be anything new happening on that. part. So all of this may not matter.
And
I
and
mean,
you can't annex without utilities.
You sure can.
Yeah,
And without roads.
Right.
Indian Lookout has no services
Nothing.
from the town, but they wanted to be.
And they won't even pick up my limbs. Sorry.
So there are
So I'm happy to do that,
counterparts
so
to
we
the
can
state,
go
just
a
like it
different
is, if the development agreement or annexation agreement said that, we are not gonna provide these things to you.
So it seems like if you went through and kind of rated each one of these and then came up with recommendations, and there may be divergent recommendations.
I'm gonna,
I mean, 'cause-
we only have 10 minutes left. I'm gonna leave it with the group. I'm gonna ask that the very first agenda item be recommendations on how do we wanna collect our information to make recommendations. I put out a proposal. I don't care. I don't know if it's right. There's might be a better tool, but I'll ask that everybody please consider that. Because we're not gonna solve any further today in the next 10 minutes.
You might be able to use a color system in each box, a red, yellow, green.
Yeah.
Or is
Great
this
idea.
is this?
High, low, high,
Is it
medium, low
similar?
priority.
But then you can easily, we did that for one of our housing assessments once, and it was easy to see very clearly which properties were not going to be easy and which ones maybe.
So if you guys are okay with that, we'll leave it as homework assignments and let's talk in detail this time so we get everybody's opinion about what they want next Tuesday to look like. The first, if we want it, we had kind of slated that as the day to have Holly, Mayor Rogan, come in and just give us her background on sort of how we got to where we are and let us ask any questions. If you all want that, I'll ask to see if she can make that happen, but it's really up to all of you.
I think that's important to me because this document is so light on content. And that's what the townspeople want, is to understand why this is the way it is. Because so much from the previous document got slashed. And Holly's insights could be good, even if she can't talk about specifics from executive meetings.
Everybody kind of thumbs up on that? What other than our formality stuff, how do you want to take on then sort of specifics around the map and what items we think, kind of what we were talking about here? Is that how you want next week's agenda to flow?
Can we get Julie's fire people and utilities people? I would
We
really
can go
love to
back to
know
that.
factual answers about these things.
Yeah, so that was gonna be my next question about staff. What you all would like to see from staff. I just want to make sure those expectations are clear. I have sent Steve and Aaron an email. They should be in contact with you as soon as they can about coming. And is there anything else that you all need from staff? I've got 3 questions and I can send those answers that came from you last Friday. But is there anything like a rating system or a spreadsheet, or is there anything else that I can provide?
I think I just brought it up, but, the 2 properties that are already in the process of being developed out east,
Mhm.
maybe we could get a quick update on what their plans are,
Sure.
just so we know how it might conform with other stuff
Are you
in that
talking about
area.
the Tebow property? What do we?
Tamburello, I think it's 4651 Ute Highway and 4652 Ute Highway.
They're already annexed. They're giving an update to the Board of Trustees on July 15th, so maybe we can.
That would be great.
Yeah, and the only reason I ask is because conformity is important with what's gonna happen, and those two are already bought and
Sure.
in
The
the
south side will
process.
be commercial, the north side against the highway will be commercial, but he's open to mixed use if that's enough.
Commercial mixed use, just all commercial. Yeah.
It's pretty noisy.
So, you know, that would be one thing that would be helpful, and then other than that, I think we all need to decide a sort of a finite list of these parcels. If there's any others we wanna consider that we haven't discussed.
Right.
Um,
Any additions that we want to put on the map, is that what you're saying?
Right, and like, I think there's one 4617 Highland Drive, that 5 acre parcel that just sold, Victoria mentioned, they might be considering annexing.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
And they just have plans to maybe two ADUs for aging parents, but that's as much as they want to do.
But that's pretty much where I'm at, is I think we just really need to lock in a set amount of parcels, fairly quick review, and then get to the notes.
I don't think we should take the time to do the utilities and
Not the
Just a
fire.
rating
So
system?
how about a red, yellow, green
I'm
from
a-
that perspective?
I'm a fire person.
Yeah.
So I spent my over 30-year career doing code reviews for building places, and I don't know who the town, are you contracting with the fire engineer? I mean, that discussion might be too unwieldy. You can go online and look at the code.
Yeah, I mean,
It's free to look at.
do some research.
I have,
Does your development review
Yeah.
regulations, do they have requirements in there?
Yeah.
So
They do.
maybe.
Dave Lowry was our fire
understanding-
marshal that looked it over.
So maybe understanding what the town requires already during. the
We tried to do that last week. And I thought, and I'm okay with not doing the fire and utility presentation. I actually trust the annexation process. And I really brought that up for people who don't trust those processes, to give them more information about what they involve. But that
It's
could be something
online.
that we just send links to the group and people can research on their own. I don't need it. I believe that the annexation process is robust and hard and full of obstacles, and I'm okay with striking that if other people are, even though it was my original ask.
And on the fire side, it's important to note that the district's also going through their CWPP process. And that's not gonna, or that's their community wildlife or wildfire protection plan. And that's not gonna be done until next year. So a lot of this kind of security and answer that you all might be looking for, they're not gonna be able to answer really until that CWPP is completed yet. So that's the last thing I'll say.
is there a way to know, because like there is not water above most of this property, we do not supply. And to annex something and require a high density and not have the ability to provide fire hydrants to a fire
I
person.
don't think it would be
to put out a
annexed if
fire.
that wasn't possible. You are sounding like the annexation happens before the annexation process happens. And it won't, because if water can't happen, if fire hydrants can't happen,
Fire suppression
if those
systems
things
can't
can't happen, annexation will not happen.
But what I wanna know is how you get water above the blue line. Who pays for
The
it?
developer,
How does it happen? Because it's gotta change our infrastructure to get water
I
up there.
believe the developer has to do that.
That's
So
correct.
the town does not do it. So there's your answer. There was actually an answer to the question.
Is there a
That
code
hurt.
there somewhere where I could look that one up?
All development is the cost of the developer unless otherwise negotiated with the board of trustees.
Including updating the city's water system.
The part that's gonna tap into them.
Developer takes the water and bring it up to his new place.
Developers pay a lot of money.
We're 5 minutes from a hard stop, so let's see if we
Well,
can
those
maybe
things
bring
are
this
stupid,
back
like
in just
whole
1 more
new
minute.
water towers and pump stations that have to
I
do.
do think maybe y'all need to try to start setting goals. Are you gonna agree on the map
We can't
next
even
week?
get, we can't even get an agenda. Ladies,
Back to the center here.
ladies,
Back to center here. So the agenda for next
We got a
meeting
hard
so
stop.
far. Agenda for next meeting so far.
we have one thing.
No, we have a lot of things, actually.
Okay, read them off.
We all have homework to do. What is this process going to look like? How are we gonna collect this information and formulate final recommendations? Think about what you wanna do and don't wanna do. Give that to Doug before the next meeting. Mayor Rogan is on the agenda. We just struck fires utilities. Information needs that did you hear, you've got Martin's couple of questions on an update for the recently annexed parcels. Any parcels to annex we haven't discussed. I would like to propose a straight up vote on what parcels to add, to include in the map at our next meeting. I think we should decide at least the map part. If we need to dive into the words later, fine, but I think we've got to get a thing figured out, and that seems like a pretty low hanging fruit, y'all. It's like, is it the ones that are there? Are there more? Are there less? There's only 3 options. So that's my proposal for adding to the agenda.
Anybody else want to add anything else?
I guess on that, on what she just said about things that maybe aren't on the map, maybe that would be, or maybe it's a Holly
Well,
answer.
or Martin seems to know a couple of things, so we can talk about, if anyone has ideas about parcels that should be added, do your own homework.
Mhm.
Ask questions of the people, all of these people that are helping us in the town, ask them stuff, and then come back here with an actual proposal. I think this property should be annexed, and here's why. And if you can't say that,
Don't.
I'm gonna just say, don't bring it up, because we don't have time in this hour and a half to do what we're doing now.
We don't have time in the whole process.
Right, well, I'm gonna have time in the next however many weeks. This is supposed to
Yeah.
end in 1 month.
Yeah.
I'm going to festival
Less
August.
than that.
No, I'm not gonna see me. So voting on the parcels to include, if you have a new parcel to propose, a parcel and a proposal and a reason. Read up on the fire code, read up on the utilities, ask this fabulous staff, board of trustees, all these people we have that are helping, ask them questions before the next meeting, and then come here with answers.
Anybody want to add anything else? Martin?
Just,
Let me go through my task list.
No, I think I'm good.
Wendy, anything else you want to add? Any other data requests you need? Martin was, any
Oh,
other?
I just requested those 2, and along those lines, if those property applied for annexation,
Tebow just submitted their annexation.
so that's Tamburello.
He's already.
Oh, yeah, the one across the street, yeah.
It's already
He's
on that.
He's already.
That's what I thought. I just
He's
want to
part
make
of the
sure.
town, yeah.
Any additional?
That's
My,
good.
back to my question, the things that aren't on the map, we have 0 knowledge about unless you happen to live next to it. And those are the properties on the map that maybe Boulder County owns or whatever that aren't in the, that was my question. There's a few weird ones.
Nothing else with the agenda?
Wait, I don't.
And Cindy is-
I did this myself.
All right, so we'll assume that those are all the agenda
So we
items.
can't say, oh, let's put it on
At this
there,
point,
something there.
I think the following meeting, if we make success tomorrow, the following meeting should be 100% on the document itself. Would we agree with that? So I'm gonna put a
Yes.
preliminary on that as well.
And everyone should have read both of them.
And then any data that you get, any tables that you find, any reports that you dig out of our archives, anything you think needs to be shared with the group, you can either send it to me directly, and I will not respond to it, but I will put it in our packet for next week. And we'll just keep adding, and if people want to look at it, great, and if they don't, that's their prerogative. Okay? With that, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Second. All in favor?
I.
Since y'all are gonna have action the next meeting, I presume, it can't be a workshop. It has to be an advertised meeting. Just
Take action.
Just point of clarification for when you're putting the agenda together.
So the meeting, not a workshop.
Yeah.
You can vote.